honorable guest, Lorcan Finnegan, with us. Hi.
Hi.
And welcome.
Thank you.
So, thank you for this lovely Christmas movie. You said at the beginning of the screening that there were a few moments in there that were improvised. May I hazard a guess? Was one of them the rat?
Yeah, the rat wasn't something that was like the rat was in the movie, but putting the rat into that guy's mouth wasn't improvised, but it was an idea that kind of formed while we were making the film. Yeah, Nick had this. He kind of wanted to keep the rat prop in his pocket. We kind of got quite attached to it, and when we were kind of, he wasn't really sure. I think even he didn't really know why he wanted to keep it, but he knew that something was happening in his imagination, and there was this connection between the movie Sabrina, which is like from 1956 or something, where a character puts an olive into another guy's mouth and says, "Eat it."
Is that Humphrey Bogart?
Humphrey Bogart, yeah. So I think he made that connection between the olive and the rat and wanted to push it into someone's mouth and say, "Eat it."
Brilliant, brilliant. That's a good idea. And what was the other moment? You said there were a couple of
there's
parts.
like a scene where he's walking around the car park completely delirious, and he started, like, we just sort of followed him. We weren't really sure. There's a little bit of dialogue in the script, but the dialogue was kind of like he mutters incoherently to people. So he started coming out with all this stuff about cooking pasta, clams, casino, puttanesca pasta, and all that kind of stuff. That was all just kind of free form improv.
Yeah, it seems like that comes easy to him. So, was he the first person you thought of when trying to cast the movie? How did it start, the project?
Well, actually, it wasn't. Originally, the character was supposed to be Australian, and he was like an Australian guy returning to this town on the other side of the country. But we realised that it was quite limiting in terms of casting, and then we thought, actually, if we opened it up and he was from another country altogether, or like he was born in Australia but then left, and then he lost his accent and everything, that would make him much more of an outsider. So we kind of just changed the script really to make him an American, like an Australian who moved to California and then was returning. And then we thought of who could possibly play that role, and Cage came up, and we thought, well, we'll try, we'll give it a go. And but he read it pretty quickly and he really liked it, and he'd seen a couple of my films, and we had a call and we got on very well. So then he was the surfer.
And did Nicolas Cage have other creative input as well?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think on all the films I've done anyway, we kind of collaborate with the actor, early on, and sometimes they have some ideas about things. I mean, mostly with this, it was more like tweaks to dialogue and shortening stuff or adding little things here and there. Nothing structural, really, nothing major. But we sort of did all of that quite early on in prep. So then when we came to shoot, we just were able to shoot really fast, keep moving. It wasn't like big long discussions about things because we'd already talked everything through.
So your experience with directing Nicolas Cage itself, it was pretty easy going, or
yeah,
went pretty smoothly?
Yeah, it was good. We got on. I think it was just a good collaboration. We got on well. We both found stuff funny. The same kind of stuff. We have similar tastes in movies, and so it was just kind of worked.
So I've heard in other interviews that this movie was partly a tribute to Frank Perry's The Swimmer from 1968. Now, in what ways did The Swimmer influence The Surfer?
I mean, in terms of like color and stuff like that, and a man's journey. Obviously The Swimmer is a little bit darker, but it's like a short story, originally, and the short story is quite simple, but it's talking about this, a very kind of manly man losing his mind in a place, you know, across a short period of time. So, I mean, story-wise, it's a little bit similar, but then stylistically, there's a lot of these kind of dreamy things within that film, like shots that are quite slow zooms into faces and stuff like that. So that was kind of an influence as well.
So about the hallucinatory aspects of the movie, how exactly did you achieve this visually?
Which scenes?
For example, there's a lot of scenes where you can see the sun having an effect on him, kind of like almost like it's a hallucination that he is getting, well, that the sun is getting to him, the warmth is getting to him, the elements.
Well, a lot of that's color as well. Like the color palette of the film is all very hot colors. There's like no cool colors really, apart from the sea and the sky. And then we did a lot of optical work with the camera. You know, we chose lenses, like the Panavision vintage lenses that had a lot of interesting flares and blotchiness as well when you look at the sun, and also shot into like a perspex bendy mirror to kind of warp the image, and use flame bars to have like heat distortion and things like that. It was all kind of in-camera optical effects, old school.
Yeah. Are you very hands-on when you do that, or do you?
Yeah,
I guess you work
very close. Well, the mirror.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, you work very close with a cinematographer, I guess, for all the shots, because there's a lot of very vivid shots. I feel there's a lot of these God view moments and these close-ups that remind me a little bit of Breaking Bad. You get the same feeling of heat. I mean, that's New Mexico and this is Australia, but as the audience, even though outside it's maybe 10 degrees, I felt like, you know, diving into that sea. So was that something you wanted to achieve, this feeling of heat and suffering with the character?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that was in the script, so before we even had the location or anything. So, you know, he was supposed to be getting dehydrated in the sun, you know, cracking his lips and getting sunburned and delirious from lack of food and too much sun. So it's just trying to achieve that visually. Yeah, so me and Radek, the cinematographer, who's a Polish GP, we just kind of, everything was on location. So like we were living like 5 minutes from the location, and so we were able to like go down in prep, you know, and just walk through all of the scenes, and then even on the weekends we'd plan the next week's work by walking through it, and so we had like a bit of time to test camera and grade and lenses and all that kind of thing, so we were kind of building the visual language during prep.
And the location was always to be Australia.
Yeah.
It was always supposed to be a surf movie in Australia.
Well, it could have been set in California or Portugal or somewhere, but another influence on the film in general was like new wave Australian films or Ozploitation films from the 60s and 70s that I love and Thomas Martin, the screenwriter, loves. So we kind of wanted to make a contemporary Ozploitation film in Australia. So that's what we set out to do.
Were there specific scenes that were a little bit trickier to get right than you initially thought?
Yeah, loads of them. One scene that was particularly tricky, I didn't think it would be as difficult, it was just that scene where Nick is fighting his character Pitbull, Alexander Bertrand's character, in the water with the rat and all that. I mean, the rat was easy, but the fighting was just, like, first of all, the beach is like really noisy. So all of that dialogue is ADR, because you can't, the problem with that is you can't even hear each other. So like you're talking to, you know, the cameraman, or you're talking to the grip or something, and you can't hear each other. It just makes it difficult. But also, I thought, okay, there's not the fight in the water, sort of, you know, up to their waists. But the water, was, because it was, you know, the sea, and it was there was a reef out on the break, it would come in and push the actors onto the beach. So then suddenly there'd be no water and they'd just be on the sand, or else it would start pushing them out to sea, and everyone would start to swim with them, and the camera's going under the water. And it was cold. Like the water was actually pretty bloody cold. So that was probably, and we had to get all of it. So like we couldn't just go, oh, okay, let's finish this tomorrow. We had to just keep going. And so the actors were pretty exhausted, and the camera got a bit wrecked. There's a leak in the bag and stuff like that. But yeah, other than that, there's some like the scene where they go tripping in the, he smokes a pipe, and that was a kind of a night where we had to get a lot of stuff, and we weren't really sure exactly what we were even going to shoot, but and it was a night shoot, so we just kept on like grabbing stuff as quickly as we could, and I kind of had an idea in my head of how it would edit together, but didn't really have time to like storyboard anything rather. That was very kind of intuitive, so that was good fun though.
And I can imagine that shooting in Australia brings about its own challenges with the wildlife and such as well.
Yeah, well, the sharks were a thing. Yeah, Nick didn't really want to be eaten by a shark, but he did have to do a bit of water stuff, but once you start thinking about the sharks, because there's a lot of sharks there, and even like on our lunch break one time, people were swimming in the sea, and a helicopter flew over us, telling people to evacuate, get out of the water, because there was like a massive tiger shark there. But that was the only thing really. The rest of the wild, there's a lot of snakes as well. Nick actually got bitten by a snake. The snake in the movie was being really slow because it was a night shoot, and they're cold-blooded and they're not very active in the cold, or at night. And I was asking the animal handler, so like say you're Nick, snake is here, the animal handler was right behind him, so I said, is there anything we can do to get the snake more active? And she said, you tickle his tail. So Nick was like very comfortable with snakes, he has reptiles and snakes and everything. So he said, okay, cool, so he tickled his tail, and it just went like, whack, and bit him on the hand, it was bleeding and everything. And he was like, oh my god, what the fuck, And she was like, oh yeah, sometimes it bite you when you tickle his tail.
Oh, yeah, it would have been great to know before.
I know, exactly. But there were a lot of
a venomous snake.
It wasn't